I'm glad you brought up that, you don't have to be a senior on a campaign to make a difference. And so someone actually, one of our attendees had a question. So what tools did you not have early on in your career that you wish you had? And how did you get them? And why are those tools important?
Yeah, that's a great question. Y'all, I started with nothing. I didn't know, I'm a girl from Brownsville, Texas, first gen. My parents are Mexican. They're naturalized citizens. I had no clue how to get to Washington, D.C. or how to get involved in campaigns at all. And because no one around me knew either, I was very shy and hesitant to ask people for help or for advice. And I think that's the number one thing that impacts a lot of women, I feel like, asking for help. And it was probably the biggest relief for me to know that people actually want to be helpful to you. And so I think that's the first step. The best first step to take is to break out of your shell and start asking for help. The other thing that I felt kind of that I needed to go outside of my comfort zone was asking people for coffees, or for, phone call advice, people that I didn't know. And I think that for me, I felt like that was a very DC thing. But that is how you build your network and your relationships. And I would not hesitate to honestly ask for a list of all of the speakers who have come through here so that you could reach out to them one-on-one and ask follow-up questions or ask for recommendations or ask for advice. Similar to the first tip. But when I say I didn't know anything, I didn't know anything. I didn't know about polling. I didn't know about how to organize. And the best decision for me in my entire life was becoming an organizer. I feel like when you're a field organizer, when you have to knock on doors, it pushes you out of your comfort zone, and it teaches you about learning how to listen to issues that are important to local communities. And honestly, after having that experience, I think that it allows you to build policy in a much smarter way. It allows you to build communication strategies in a much smarter way, political strategies in a much smarter way. So if you have the opportunity to maybe even volunteer and go knock on doors, I would absolutely recommend it.
Thank you. And speaking of being in the beginning of your career, we have Deja here, and I have a question for you. So what was it like being the youngest staffer on Kamala Harris's presidential campaign? And I cannot, that's amazing at the age of 19 years old and still young, still a college student. How did you juggle all of that? And what were some of the challenges that you might have faced as the youngest staffer? Like, were people taking you seriously? How did you make sure that your voice was being heard?
Right. Yeah. So like you mentioned, I was 19 when I started work on the Kamala Harris campaign. I had just moved into my sophomore year dorm and got started in my classes, and about a week in, I got an ask if I knew anyone who'd be interested in working on the digital team out of her headquarters. And I was like, I have some friends that just graduated, like, let me think on it. And then they followed up and asked if I'd be interested. And I said, yeah. And I picked up my life, repacked my dorm that I had just unpacked, and moved to Baltimore, a city I'd never even been to before. I signed my first lease all by myself, and got to work in a position that hadn't existed before I showed up, and it was as the influencer and surrogate strategist. So I worked on the intersection of how we use supporters and supporters with large followings to really amplify our message in a digital space, and how we translate that to folks on the ground and at rallies, and really creating that digital footprint. And so that role didn't exist before I got there, and it was something I got to build out as I was going. And I think as a 19-year-old coming in with experience, having worked as an influencer myself, having worked on influencer strategy for brands like Aussie and Tresemme as a consultant, and senior partner at a Genz marketing firm, and then coming from my activist background, where I used to organize on the ground, for sex education and birth control access in my hometown in Arizona, I brought all of these things together in a really interesting way when I stepped into my role at the Kamala Harris campaign. And I would say that everyone took me seriously. When I walked in the door and they started bringing me from office to office, everyone was like, oh my God, we're so excited that you're here. We heard you're gonna do this and that, and we're so excited to see what you can do. Because what was interesting about my role was that it was so outside of the box, right? And people were excited to see what I would turn it into. And my like employee training, when we all sat down, the new hires, they talked about perspective and what perspective means on a campaign like ours and for a candidate like Kamala Harris, right? And as I looked around, I was surrounded by not only other people of color, but primarily other women of color. And I was routinely in meetings where I was in rooms full of women of color. And so I think what was really special about our campaign was it was the most diverse in the entire primary field. And it was diverse in all kinds of ways: age, right? Gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity. And it really showed in the way that we created policy and the way that we engaged with people, and the way that we created excitement around our candidate.
No, absolutely. That's great. And you definitely did a great job because her online presence, like we all could see it. And no, so thank you for that. And you did mention that your role was really outside of the box. It was brand like a fairly new concept. And so can you talk a little bit more about the future, or what do you think the future of digital campaigning would look like? And especially during this pandemic with COVID-19, with everything that's happening, a lot of the campaigns throughout the nation, they have had to suspend their in-person field operation. And how do you think digital campaign could actually take place, and could maybe even eventually replace field operation? And what do you think the future would look like for digital campaigning?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I'm incredibly interested in all of the aspects of work that I do. I try to find the places where social media and social justice meet, right? Whether it was as an activist and viral videos using them as tactics, right, to gain momentum, or as an influencer and surrogate strategist, finding those niche communities and how we could speak to them. But I think what's really interesting about this shift to digital is that it's been happening for a long time, but it all happened really quickly, right? Just even 8 years ago, right? 8 years ago might have been our first digital teams on presidential campaigns to begin with, right? And so in the scope of things, digital campaigns, period, or digital teams, period, are relatively new. And so it's only a natural growth that as we start to figure out all the nuances of the way that we live our lives digitally and these platforms continue to grow and change, that the roles that we need will change too. And I don't think that we'll ever truly replace the on-the-ground organizer. I think that face-to-face interaction, that ability to say, this is my community, I know these people, I went to elementary school with her and I saw so-and-so at the grocery store, is really important. But I would say that I think we are making that transition to digital in everything we do. And it's because our daily lives are taking a digital turn. And I also think if we are going to, and I think it is essential that we really engage young people in our political process, we're going to have to meet them where they're at, and they're online.
No, absolutely. And you're correct, as in, like, that's what campaigning is about. When you're trying to get people out to vote, we have to figure out ways to meet people where they are, whether it's door knocking, digital campaigning, or whatever it may be. And that varies from different groups to groups, or even like during this time, a lot of campaigns have had to adjust their strategy. Yeah. So thank you for that. And well, Monica, I have a question for you, and you have done a lot of great job in especially with the campaign, with helping the Assemblywoman got elected. But I'm gonna read off a quote that Arizona Representative Greg Stanton. He actually said this back in 2018. So when he was first elected in November of 2018, he considered it a no-brainer that his campaign political director, who her name was Elizabeth Paris, she was 28 years old, he was going to hire her to join his congressional staff. But he later found out, after he got elected as the congressman of Arizona, he later found out that a dreamer was actually forbidden from working for a member of Congress on the Capitol Hill. And I'm literally quoting him, so it's not me. But he said, he was like, I would call it a WTF moment. Like why? It's mean-spirited, it doesn't make sense, and dreamers should be allowed to work on the Capitol Hill. So what I'm trying to get to is that historically, undocumented youth has been underrepresented in the political space. And how can we make sure that campaigns are hiring more undocumented youth and make sure that their voices are being heard? And how can we build a pipeline of undocumented political operatives given the existing obstacles like what the Arizona Representative Greg Stanton had just mentioned?
Hi, everyone. So very familiar with the case, very familiar with understanding the barriers for undocumented immigrants and immigrant communities and accessing this space. I think we've heard so far from the history and the background of our different identities and how that has led us to occupy these spaces. And so the best way to put it is that there are already resources. There are campaigns that are moving forward to incorporate an opportunity for undocumented immigrants to be part of this process. I do have to share that although there is an opportunity, there's also a need to understand what's the difference within the undocumented community, because you have DACA recipients who have a work permit and they are able to apply for a job. They are able to work in the campaign side, but in certain locations, they will not be able to work in government. And so I think this varies from cities to states a lot. And there's actually a lot of work for the past 3 years that has been something that I really have focused, because undocumented immigrants could legally work in campaigns, but once they jump into the government offices, they still could be part of supporting those elected officials. They will just have to do it through their political campaigns. And so it's just understanding the legality of it, making sure that they're staying within the law, it's very key, but there are ways to keep them engaged. So when I heard cases, or I've heard cases of DACA and undocumented people who are unable to continue to work with an elected official, I think it's because we're not pushing forward and saying, here are how we can accommodate for them to continue to work with us. And so happy to share more resources in terms of how you could advocate for that. I think that comes back to you having the network, having built that relationship with the candidate you're working with and the team you're working with, where you can come forward and say, I'm actually undocumented, and here are some of the things that I'm gonna need to accommodate now moving forward in order to continue with this campaign. A big shout out I'll give to Solidarity Strategies, who I met about 2 years ago, Sara, I'm not sure. And I really, 3 years ago, oh my goodness. And so I got to see how they've hired so many DACA students and so many DACA immigrants who were able to travel from state to state and open offices for presidential candidates. And that is something that we're not often talking about it, but it's also because, do we have to talk about it? Do the DACA recipients and undocumented immigrants that are getting hired want to be recognized as such? I was one of 3 Latinas running statewide campaigns in New York, and no one wanted in a way to violate my privacy by making people aware of it. And so I stayed quiet. My last campaign, no one knew that I was undocumented in the local community, because they all thought I was a documented person. And so I was legally allowed to work. And after, when I decided to let everyone know that the reason why I wasn't moving forward with the campaign into the government office is because I am unfortunately undocumented and I don't have my papers to even work around it. And I also don't like working for government. I'd rather get more people elected in there. And so understanding that and just having those levels of communication with the staffers and whoever else you're working with, I think is the first part. And then the second part is just understanding that all undocumented immigrants or DACA recipients want to go into government. So it's just more, I think right now we're in a space, especially for our group of individuals, figuring out what that looks like in terms of creating a system, because we can just jump on or say, come here and tell you, here is what the system should look like for all undocumented immigrants that want to be part of that process. But I could tell you that there are people who want to be in government, who want to work in government, who could be doing an amazing job there, that unfortunately, because of the legal side of things internally, they're not able to do it. So it varies from city to city, from state to state. Are there resources? Yes. But I think the key thing for me is just making sure that we're talking to the individuals first before creating systems that it may not be something that they're looking to be a part of.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. And we actually had attendees who were they left a comment in the chat box. They would love to have the resources that you had just mentioned. They would love to learn more about it. And also, Monica, you brought up a very interesting point that working in government is different from working on a campaign. A lot of folks, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I do know of folks who, they hop on a campaign hoping to transition into the official role and vice versa. So like, what are the differences between both of them? And actually, and you did mention that you don't like working for the government. If you feel comfortable, feel free to share why. What are just, some insight as to that?
Totally. And I think I appreciate my last boss because she let me see what it looks like to do the transition internally. So while we were trying to figure out, first, I think I just got to take a step back. So once we won our primary, which in New York, that was the main thing, I just wanted to quit. We got too much attention. It became a national thing. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't want to tell people who I was. And then, people started to see like the other Latina, young, and now undocumented running a campaign. And we shared the district with Congresswoman Ocasio. And so it just became a blowout, like completely overnight. And I just wanted to quit. And she said, you can do it. There were other people who jumped on and they said, you have to wait all the way through the end. I waited, I stayed throughout the whole campaign. But then the transition for government, not only I knew that I don't like it because I've heard about the bureaucracy. I worked a lot in issue campaigns, and my job is to convince those elected officials to pass legislation. And after 4 years of working on the New York State DREAM Act in New York, which gave undocumented immigrants access to a higher education, I knew that it's not easy. It takes so much to get them to compromise. It takes a lot of understanding about their different cities, who they represent, their districts, and all this. So for me, I felt that in order for me to convince people to change legislation that directly impacted the communities that they were representing was to get people from that community elected into office. So that was one. And then two, once I jump on helping the transition, little things like getting her picture taken to make sure that it goes on the website, or going through the ethic committees meetings to get her IDs and the paperwork, it was intimidating. I felt like I wasn't ready. That was number one. And two, I felt that if you get involved, you're going to need at least a year or two to really get the hang of it, to continue if that's what you want to do. And I felt that going there was going to take too much of my time, and I wanted to see more people elected into office rather than working in there. So bureaucracy takes time to learn. And I'll say it's just a bit intimidating, especially for a young Latina woman getting in there. It took a lot of courage for me not to cry when I was behind her and she was having a meeting with all these state senators. Mind you, she allowed me to be in that room when I was the only Latina and the only staffer in the room with her, so then I could see how that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your experience. Jackie, we'll go to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role as the finance director, and what does that mean, like being a finance director? And also, we have received a lot of questions about fundraising. It's just such a scary topic, like for someone who has never done this before, like just thinking about the amount of money that requires to run for office. It's like you need tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and for certain races, you need millions of dollars. And so, and especially for first generation, you know, for folks who might be facing financial difficulties or obstacles, like how it just the whole, please demystify the whole finance world for us in campaign. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sorry, I was like, this is the part where I pull down a huge map and there are a bunch of drawings and illustrations about what to do. But it's, I guess we'll start with what my job is. So I am in charge of fundraising, making sure that we, you know, the campaign manager and the finance director come in and plan a budget for the campaign, sometimes more than one. It's customary for campaigns to have what we call like a Cadillac budget, or like a dream budget of if we raise X amount of money, then this is all the wonderful, amazing things that we're going to do with the money and how we're going to spend where and all of these things. And then we have, you know, it's just like a top, middle, bottom kind of budget. So where we can easily look at where our goals are and where they should be, and where we can strive for them to be. So I make sure that we're raising the money, and a lot of that looks like daily fundraising goals, weekly fundraising goals, monthly fundraising goals. So a lot of it is just as simple as cutting down the budget into months, into weeks, into days, and making sure that we're raising money in different ways. So one of the ways that we do that is by, you know, we work with comms and digital to raise money online via social media. Sometimes we'll send an email out to our list and our supporters and see how much money we could raise there. And other times we'll have fundraising events. And those are kind of like traditional fundraising events where people pay a ticketed amount, come in and get to meet with the candidate and learn more about why the candidate is running and what they're wanting to accomplish. And then there are other ways. The biggest way to raise money is through call time, and that's kind of a downer for a lot of people because no one likes getting on the phone and cold calling people you don't know for money, and not everyone is great at it. I mean, if there ever was a candidate that came up to me that says, I love call time, I would say you're a liar, because it's not true. No one loves call time. So, I mean, and the amount of work that goes into call time involves a lot of teamwork with interns and staff and working laterally with the team. And sometimes you have to meet the needs of the candidate, right? If you have an introvert, sometimes that person will need a lot more coaching, a lot more positive involvement. And then there are other candidates that prefer having a drill sergeant in the room during call time. Someone could be harsh on them and tell them you're slacking, let's get on board with this. But the goal of the fundraising finance director is to make sure that the goals are being met, but also that the candidate is a good, comfortable space within their campaign, right? That they know that money is being raised through all these ways, and where they as the candidate fit in with that, right? I need my candidate to make sure that they're focusing on call time and that they're making sure to get to these events when they need to. I don't need them worrying about how much money to raise and you know, how much call time we need to do in a way, because that's my job. And so what was the other part of your question? Sorry, I just got completely carried away.
You know, I honestly don't even remember what exactly.
Just how?
Just
Yeah, no.
so one of the questions that we received throughout the training is like, how do we fundraise? Like, how are we gonna get like millions of dollars or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands? And the other one that we did get, I did not ask this initially, but this is something that has come up, is that how do you raise money with COVID-19, like with the pandemic? Because, well, like people are struggling. Like, how do you don't want to be you don't want to be one of those candidates who's asking people for money in this economy. So like how do you fundraise during this time?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. You know, it's kind of like uncharted territory for everyone, right? There's not a right way or a wrong way to raise money. I mean, there is a wrong way to raise money in this time, right? You don't want to bog people down and, you know, let them know that you really need their money, and regardless of whatever is happening in their lives, this campaign is more important. The campaign is important to the community, to the candidate, to everything going on, but I think it's meaningful to take a step back from that and to recognize that your constituents in your community is being deeply affected. And what can you do as a team, as a candidate, to support these people? And a lot of times call time is going to look different during nowadays. It's not just going to be cold calls like, hey, I need X amount of money. It's going to be, hey, how are you doing? You've supported me so much in the past, and I just want to check in to see how you're doing. And I want to let you know what the campaign is up to. We're taking a step back, and we're taking a look at our resources. And a lot of that, we can't have traditional fundraising events anymore, at least for the foreseeable future, depending on where you live, what state you're in, and all that stuff. But a lot of this is transitioning online into digital. You know, how much can we use with Zoom virtual events? People have been really interested in that. People have been really interested in getting to know what the candidate is doing in their own personal lives. It's a great way for the candidate to, you know, be personal and be human. And I think that's really important too. But, you know, the other question was how do you start fundraising? Where do you target? And a lot of that kind of just depends on what the candidate and race is, but you're going to want to start within, you know, your own network, and you're going to want to Rolodex the candidate, and, you know, who did you go to school with? Who do you know? Who do you work with? All of this stuff. And then you're going to want to move outwards into people that are affected by the work that you could possibly be doing. So, you know, for example, my candidate right now is a chief justice. She runs the whole court system in North Carolina. And so a lot of attorneys are really in tune into what's going on right now, because some people don't have capacity to go into work right now, into the courthouses. So you kind of work outwards, and then hopefully social media and digital and email and all of that stuff helps, you know, spread the network out even more. Who can we not reach by calling and mailing, and social media, you know, who can we reach by just one person connecting to one person, connecting to another person, connecting to another. And that's how it all kind of interweaves. Fundraising has to be really in tune with comms, has to be really in tune with digital and social media right now. And I think it's just going to be something that changes campaigns forever. You know, there are going to be contingency plans for sure for the foreseeable whenever. And I think that's really important for a campaign and fundraising to be flexible to meet the demands and the needs of the campaign.
Thank you for that summary. I know, Jackie, that could be a whole 1 hour session just on fundraising.
A whole week.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So with that being said, everyone, we are gonna split into 4 groups. Okay, now we have everyone back. Well, I hope everyone found the breakout sessions to be useful and more interactive. So thank you again to our amazing, amazing panelists for spending your afternoon or evening with us here. To wrap things up, I'll let Sara take over and she will share a little bit about like a preview of what's happening tomorrow. And also, actually, yeah, Sara, I'll let you take over for that one. You're muted.
Thank you. Okay, hi, hello again. I am just gonna pop our evaluation form in the chat box for folks to fill out for today. If you've already filled one out Monday or Tuesday, you can just edit your response to include today. Tomorrow we close up Boss Ladies Campaign Staffer Training Week. We are going to dive deep into the first 100 days of a campaign. And we also have an Ask Me Anything for 1 or 2 campaign operatives that are going to answer some more questions for us in the last bit tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our lovely panelists, Natalie, Monica, Deja, I see you somewhere. Do I see everyone? No, wait, I lost the one that was in my session. Jackie, okay. There you are. Okay, there's too many Zoom faces. But thank you so much. Please fill out the eval. We really want lots of feedback given that this is our first time trying this all out. Thank you again to our panelists, and we'll see you all one more time tomorrow.
Yeah, and thank you. And it's such an honor for me to be moderating this panel. So thank you again. And hopefully I'll see all of you here tomorrow.